Welcome to Never Again is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. Are Jewish teens in America experiencing anti-Semitism? Unfortunately, they are. Today we have a guest who educates Jewish teens to be proud and speak up. I am Evelyn Marcus, and in addition to being a psychologist, I am featured in the documentary about anti-Semitism, Never Again is Now. I am a Dutch Jew and a daughter of Holocaust survivors. In 2006, I immigrated to the United States because of the rising anti-Semitism in Europe.
I am Phyllis Zimbler Miller. I'm the founder of the free nonfiction Holocaust Theater Project, thinedgeofthewedge.com. I grew up in the Midwestern town of Elgin, Illinois, where there was a small Jewish community. No Holocaust survivors, really. All our parents and grandparents had come at the turn of the 20th century to escape the Tsar and other pogroms. And yet, in September 1970, my U.S. Army officer husband and I were stationed in Munich, Germany, only 25 years after the end of World War II and the Holocaust, and this changed our lives forever.
Naya Lekht is the Director of Education for Club Z, a rapidly growing Zionist youth movement in the United States, where she developed and teaches the curriculum to create proud, articulate Zionist Jewish youth. I met Naya at the screening of my documentary that she had organized at Club Z for a group of teens in Los Angeles. I was deeply moved by the stories her teens shared with me that evening about the anti-Semitism they are experiencing. And I was enormously impressed by the knowledge and pride with which they speak up in their schools for the Jewish people and Israel. Naya was born in the former Soviet Union and immigrated to the United States with her family in 1989. She got her PhD and taught at UCLA, where she wrote about Holocaust literature in the Soviet Union, and she was a scholar in residence at the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism, ISGAP. Naya lectures widely on modern-day anti-Semitism. Naya, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so very much for having me. It's a weighty topic, but a necessary one. So thank you so much. It's very needed, really.
So I happen to ask the first question. Does the anti-Semitism today in America resemble the anti-Semitism you know from the Soviet Union?
So that's an excellent question. And I'll answer it in a few ways. First and foremost, in the Soviet Union, anti-Semitism, it waned and surged and waned and surged. But when it did surge, it was state-sponsored. I do not believe that in the United States of America, we have state-sponsored anti-Semitism, meaning it's not woven or codified in law. However, having said that, anti-Semitism today is anti-Zionism. Anti-Semitism today is defaming the state of Israel. It's an assault on Jewish identity vis-a-vis Israel. And Soviet Jews were the first victims of anti-Zionism. The anti-Zionist campaign that we are seeing today was played out, was hatched, was born in the Soviet Union. As such, it's not very different. It's very similar. What is very different, interestingly enough, is the reactions from Jews. So in the Soviet Union, anti-Zionism was anti-Semitism, and Jews understood it and felt it. American Jewry is still wrestling, unfortunately, with whether or not anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. They are not sure, whereas Soviet Jews were very sure. So that's an interesting contrast. So what we are seeing today, calling Israel a settler colonial state, calling Israel an apartheid state, defaming Israel by saying that it's a colonial state, or Zionism is racism. All of this is not new. It was born in the Soviet Union and really strategically was shipped to the world through various NGOs and, of course, through the United Nations and through the conference in South Africa in Durban. And it's being played out in the last 20 years in the United States of America, and American Jews are feeling it. At the same time, as I would like to just reiterate, Unlike Soviet Jews, for whom anti-Zionism 100% was anti-Semitism, American Jews are still wrestling with whether it is criticism of Israel or blatant anti-Semitism.
I think that's a very interesting distinction, because I worked at the Jewish Exponent in Philadelphia during the 1970s when we came back from living in Europe, and we covered the refuseniks and Soviet Jewry weekly in the pages of the Exponent. And I never thought about the difference between really understanding it and how American Jews really don't understand it. So it's really good that you emphasized it. Now,
Yes,
what about, go
and
ahead.
and I also remember in the 70s, still living in the Netherlands, how this anti-Zionism and anti-Semitic with anti-Zionism combined with classic anti-Semitic tropes was entering our media, and especially through, at that time, through the left. We knew anti-Semitism from the right. We didn't know it from the left, but then it was clear that it was fed by the Soviet Union, which was feeding a lot in our media at that time. It was the Cold War. So I recognize that. I even felt it in the Netherlands.
So tell us about American teens today in America. How are they experiencing anti-Semitism? And could you give us a couple of examples?
Sure. Of course, I can't give you the pulse of the entire American Jewish teen data here, but the teens that I do work with, I'll tell you this much. The way that they're experiencing anti-Semitism is in the classroom. It's in the classroom. So years ago, I used to think the epicenter of anti-Zionism was on college campuses, and this was true. And there was a shift. And the shift is that now in high schools and even in middle schools, teachers come in completely indoctrinated, and we can discuss later if you want how it came to be. But how they're experiencing anti-Semitism is through anti-Zionism and through this other important and should not be missed phenomenon, which is looking through the world through the lens of power and powerlessness. Now, Jews in the United States of America constitute a minority. We're less than 2%. However, we're living in a strange time of racializing everything. And so Jews are considered now white. And because they're white, they have privilege. And so what these Jewish teens often face is accusations of privilege, accusations of usurping power, accusations of, being even racist sometimes because they're white. So that's one element of what they're seeing. And the other one, and this one I think is very important, I perceive it as an assault on identity, that they tell Jews that Jews are a European white transplant that came to Palestine, stole the land, that they are white colonialists, which is a complete lie. But the lie has become so powerful in that Jews themselves don't even know how to answer it. So a lot of our teens face teachers who tell them of a historic Palestine, of this country, of this bucolic past, and that it was the Zionist entity, the Jews who came and basically shipped out the indigenous Palestinian population. And they don't know what to do, these American Jewish teens. They are completely unprepared for this onslaught. When a teacher comes in, for instance, and I'll give you a few examples, a teacher came into a classroom on a unit of the Middle East, pulls out a map, and instead of Israel, it says Palestine. So Israel is just not there. It's just not there. Or another time, a teacher discussed Jerusalem in class, and she showed the wall, the Kotel, a picture of the Kotel, and she asked the class, "What is special about this wall?" And one of my students, she's Jewish, raised her hand and said, "Well, this is a very important wall for the Jewish people. We pray there and we put notes in that wall." And the teacher laughed and said, "Do you know what the Israeli government does with those notes? Every day it pulls them out and puts them in basically a big ditch. And she desanctified what is holy to the Jewish people in that moment. And these teachers, they hold power in the classroom. So that's what they're facing. They're facing an erasure of their identities, an erasure of their history. The history of the Jewish people, to know that we come from the Eretz Israel, from the land of Israel. They're being told that they are colonialists. And most likely this is happening in social studies classrooms.
I think we should make it really clear here that part of it is education, that when so the answer that your student gave was interesting, but in my mind, the answer would have been that wall comes from the Jews living in Israel, the land of Israel 2,000 years ago. And the reason it's so holy is that it's been there for over 2,000 years. I think that Jewish youth really do not know enough history to quote history rather than current Jewish youth.
Absolutely. If I had to point to one of the issues of today, it's the fact that, and I'm not just talking about teens, American Jewry in general is illiterate in Jewish history.
100% agreed.
So you're absolutely right. Maybe she didn't identify it 100% correctly, but the fact of the matter is that that teacher defiled the students' connection to Israel in that moment. Or the teacher that comes and pulls out a map and says there's no Israel, it's all Palestine. Or the teacher that I'm in Los Angeles, so Calabasas High School, for instance, near me, they had a packet on the Middle East and they had to unscramble a word, Holy Land, and the answer was Palestine.
That's serious.
Yeah. Yeah. So Naya, when these things happen, and they happen more often than you can be aware of, what do you think how does it affect Jewish teens?
Well, I think on the whole, it has a binary effect. On the one side, what happens is the Jewish teens recoil and they say, oh my God, they don't want to deal with the confrontation. They feel shame, and they just kind of retreat. On the other side is the opposite effect, where anti-Semitism, and we know this historically, is an amazing force for reawakening Jewish identity.
Mm.
And in this sense, the anti-Semitism, for better or for worse, is that force. The students that I meet come to me and they say, I hear things in my class, I know they're not right. I can't say what it is about that it's not right. Please teach me, tell me, because inside there's something in them. And so these are the students, when they face anti-Semitism, they don't retreat. It's the opposite effect. They want to reclaim their identity. Historically, that's kind of how anti-Semitism functions. It reminds Jews who have forgotten of what they are.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
So how would you describe the status of Jewish education in terms of Jewish history and also education on anti-Semitism in the United States?
It's a very, very important big topic. And I'll begin with the following. As you know, I came from the former Soviet Union, and I actually went to a Jewish day school from 1st through 8th grade, to a very prominent Jewish day school in Los Angeles, where reflecting now as an adult back on my Jewish education, I will say that had it not been for my Soviet Jewish parents, I would not understand what is anti-Zionism. This is not pointing fingers or blaming, but it's to rectify. It's really to help Jewish educators. Unfortunately, Jewish education does not begin, just like you said right now, Phyllis, about that wall. It treats the wall as a spiritual center, but it's an indigenous center.
Exactly.
And that's a really important, where do you start telling the story, and how do you start telling the story of the Jewish people, right? You can't, if you start telling the story with Herzl or 1948, you lost. you have to go back to where do Jewish people come from? They come from the land of Israel. They are indigenous to this land. They had sovereignty, right? They had political borders. They had a kingdom. So this is a real, and unfortunately, they do not teach this. It's not taught. And so one of my teens once came to me, and she's very smart. And I asked her, because she went to Jewish day school for all to 12th grade. And I said, if you could tell me what's it like to learn about Israel, what did you learn? She said, I learned that Golda was a woman and Herzl had a dream.
And unfortunately, yes, both my daughters went all through to 12th grade Jewish school here in LA, both conservative and Orthodox schools. And my younger daughter they're adults now, will say, we learned about the Holocaust. We did not learn about Jewish history. And
yeah, right. Israel is a place where you go and have your bar bat mitzvah. If you're lucky, you go to the wall, you put a note in. It's like a spiritual center, but it's an indigenous center. It's your ethnic center. It's your tribal identity. I mean, this may be very simple, but if you stop a Russian person on the street and go, where are you from? Russia. Polish. Where are you from? Poland. If you ask a Jew on the street, where are Jews from? Do you know who knows the answer the best in America? Christians, non-Jews. They know where Jews are from.
Interesting.
We need to reclaim where are Jews from.
Very interesting. One of the things that in my Holocaust Theater Project and in our podcast, we try, because we talk to people around the world in English, we try and make American Jews aware of the Jewish communities in diaspora and to understand that we have this long, long history, that we're not all from Russia. And although I'm my great ancestors too, and that you have to understand that we all go back to Israel over 2,000 years ago. It's so important that kids are taught that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Again, had it not been for my mom who told me about where the name Palestine originates from and Romans, when I came to college and I saw anti-Zionism, I knew what it was because of what my mother told me. Palestine was associated with Jews for hundreds of years. My mom was told in the Soviet Union countless of times, go back to Palestine. Because it was for the non-Jewish collective mind, associated with a Jew.
Yes, as I recall, the Romans gave that name on purpose. I forget, I just read about it, and there was a reason why, but it had nothing to do with Palestinians. It had to do with whatever the word was at the time. So why aren't kids being taught that? Why?
Why? If you really want to know the answer, this is my opinion, okay? In 1885, there was a very important document that was issued by the Pittsburgh Jewish community called the Pittsburgh Manifesto. I don't know how aware you are of it, but these were German Jews who came to the United States of America through the Reform movement, and they wrote a manifesto and they had principles. One of their principles, and you can go research this, is that they say that they are Jews as a religion and that they jettison their ethnic identity. It's in the language there. We do not believe ourselves to be part of an ethnic people. We are a religious minority. Now, we can explain why they did that. What they did is they divorced Jewish ethnicity and from Jewish identity. This has had detrimental intergenerational effect in that American Jews conceptualize themselves not as an ethnic minority, but as a religious minority.
Yeah. So,
and it dictates how you teach them about Jewish history.
Yeah, it's so the mentality is we are Americans from America, and we have a Jewish religion, and that's it. So
and that's it. Palestine is there. We have no desire to return to it. This is our new golden Medina, if you will. and they were very transparent in that they said that they do no longer see themselves as an ethnic group, but as a religious minority. And it makes sense because they've come to a country which is all about what is America? America is about fleeing from religious persecution. So it made sense. But the flip side to that is the effect that it has had on American Jewish psychology.
Yeah. And it's also, it fits safe circumstances in which you are safe as a community in a country. But that can flip as well. We have seen that over and over in Jewish history. I've personally, totally unexpectedly experienced it in the Netherlands, in Europe. And then suddenly it's not safe. And you are the Jew.
Mm.
And there is an us and them.
Mm-hmm.
And now what? Then there is Israel. And then if you're not at all educated about Israel and its history and the history of your roots there, you don't stand as strong, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So what you teach, Club Z teaches teens to be proud. What does it mean to be proud?
Such a great question. So pride is a feeling. You know, whenever I build a lesson, I think of three things. Do I want effective cognitive or behavioral change? So after this session, do I want them to do something, to feel something, or know something? You could have, all. The most difficult one is effective, is feeling, to get people to feel. It's transformative and it takes years. That's why a lot of programs that do one-off, here's a workshop on anti-Semitism, here's a workshop here, and here's a workshop there. It's a start, but it's not enough. What we do is, I see it in my mind as I work with these young teens, like with clay, and I'm reorienting them. I'm reminding them of their ethnic identity, of where they come from, of the fact that when they stand as Jews, they stand rooted into Jewish history. They become literate in Jewish history. That's very important. Why? Because Jewish education looks at, instead of Jewish history, they look at Jewish values. They say, we're going to teach through Jewish values. Now, values are very amorphous. Values are very difficult to kind of anchor identity in. Because, for instance, the value of kindness is also a Christian value, right? The value of tikkun olam, which American Jews love, but why should Jews be the only ones to practice such a value? So at Club Z, the curriculum that I've built is not one rooted in, let's say, values, but rather principles and concepts, such as Jews are from Judea, okay? This is really important. Where did Jews come from? What does it mean? What is the difference between having a historic presence versus a sovereign presence? Jews historically lived in Ukraine. Does that mean that I should have a Ukrainian Jewish kingdom? No, we never had sovereignty there. So one of our biggest concepts is, where do Jews come from? That takes years to kind of unfold, because also remember, you're working with teens from 8th grade to 12th grade. Their psychology is so different, and you meet them at different levels, and you scaffold, and you really your work, like I see that image with clay, like you're working with them. What you're doing is transforming their Jewish identity, their souls. What a gift. I've met teens who come to me in their 9th grade, sometimes 8th. Oh, my mom forced me to be here. And they roll their eyes and they stick with the program. And then by 11th, 12th grade, they come to me and say, this is happening at my school. I will not let this happen. Help me. I want to pass IRA. I want to do this. These are teens who came with, they didn't feel pride. Now, how do you get them to feel pride? You remind them. You remind them to listen to the Jewish past. You remind them to hear the Jewish story. You remind them that they are an ethnicity, a tribe.
So
Whose responsibility is it to teach Jewish teens to be proud, you think?
So I got this question. I was in another podcast and somebody asked me, whose responsibility is it? And it just kind of jolted me. And I have to say that I work as a quote unquote professional Jewish educator, but I'll say that the responsibility lies with the parents, not with the Jewish educators. I do not think that parents should be outsourcing education of such a sacred thing as their neshama, the Jewish soul, to any educational platform. That is the parents' responsibility.
but here's the problem.
Okay.
Parents and American Jewish parents don't know this history themselves. So that's really, the parents need to be educated along with their teens. And that's an interesting challenge for all of us who do this work, is how do we get, so Evelyn and my podcast, how do we get American Jews to speak up against anti-Semitism, to give them the words to respond to when things are said, so that they can then teach their children?
So I'll tell you this really interesting phenomenon. When Club Z started, and I met more and more teens, more and more parents of the teens came to me and said, do you think you could do a Club Z for parents? Because what you guys are teaching, we don't know. My kid is coming home and teaching me the history of the Jewish people. So you're absolutely right. That is really important, that many parents, many adults don't even know their own history. They don't. But at the same time, if we had a podcast right now, which was about literacy, English literacy, and you asked me, whose responsibility is it to make sure that your child is literate? You would say it's the parents, because the parents would care to know what is the school teaching, what are the books that they're reading. If the parents cared as much to ask these questions, that's all I'm saying. Be more involved, care to ask. Don't just outsource Jewish education. Here, my son or daughter goes to a Jewish school. I don't have to worry about it, but you do. You really do, because sometimes, here's this sad and frightening thing, those Jewish schools produce anti-Jewish kids.
And how do they do that? What is it that they're doing that produces that?
Well, again, remember in the beginning of our podcast, we spoke about that lens, power versus powerlessness.
Yes.
It has seeped into higher education and departments of education, PhD education programs. They are being taught that education is to liberate through oppression. And so that entire framework is now, it's like a trickle down. And so even in the Jewish day schools, they view Israel as an outpost of colonialism. And so there you go.
So what you're saying is that the woke culture is now being accepted by Jewish schools, which is really poisoning our Jewish youth to understanding really the truth about their history.
Absolutely.
Would that be a...
Yes, yes, and it pains me because, I don't want to speak ill of any Jews, but yes.
Evelyn, why don't you ask the next question?
And Naya, does that lens of power and powerlessness and using education for social justice, does that somehow resemble what you have heard about methods in the Soviet Union?
100%. I mean, that is the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union they taught people to look at the world through such a lens. Now they dressed it up through class. So here we're dressing it up through race. So power and powerlessness in the Soviet Union was about class and who owns the means of production. It's the same conversation. We're redressing it within a racial framework. Who owns the means of production in terms of white versus black? It's the same conversation. We're just redressing the focal point, if you will.
Yeah.
I think
and it becomes oppressive in its own way. How can Jewish teens in America join Club Z?
Well, there's a website, www.clubz.org. And when you visit that website, you could see all our locations. We have locations in Los Angeles, Bay Area, Charlotte, North Carolina, Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Westchester. And so when you click, you just fill out an interest form, and we right away, the person who's in that area will respond immediately to that request.
So it's an in-person program, but is there any virtual for people who live in the
Yes.
flyover states?
Yes. So one of the advents, I guess, of COVID was that we opened an online institute. And so we have an online institute for teens who do not live in any of those regions.
Will teens who join Club Z meet negative consequences from their friends, from their teachers, from their schoolmates?
No, I have quite the opposite. One of our teens in LA, she's such an amazing girl, but she came to Club Z because she was seeing so much anti-Semitism, and it was cloaked as anti-Zionism, and she realized she does not have the knowledge. And she came to one of the sessions, and that particular session was on the mandate system and how Israel became Israel through the mandate system. And her mouth was though, she's like, how do I sign up? I need to be here. So this girl signs up to Club Z. She's been with us for 2 years. She now goes and educates in her school. She educates the curriculum of Club Z in her school to the Israel Club.
Wow. It's amazing.
She said to me, like, I teach people what you've taught me. So that I have yet to hear a negative. I really, and I'm not just, I have yet to hear a negative.
That is so wonderful. So we're coming to the end of our podcast, and we want to give you a chance. Is there anything, I mean, you know, we could talk for hours, but is there anything really important that we haven't talked about that you'd like to share with our listeners?
We talked about really heavy topics and kind of the dire situation. And I do think it's a dire situation, especially in the United States, with the fact of how much, as you said, the woke culture affects and infects pedagogy. I want to kind of end on a positive, if you will. I was thinking about it for a few days now, or weeks rather. And I thought to myself that actually, as a Jew, we're living in the best times, right? It's if we could ask our Jewish ancestors, do you want to live in the 14th century? Do you want to live in the 19th century? Do you want to live in the 20th, or do you want to live now? And I think that we live in the best times for Jews, right? We really do. We forget that sometimes. One of the reasons we live in the best times is that we have our sovereignty back, and that is so important. We are now back, and as I say, in history. We are not the objects of history, we are the subjects of history. And that is a really important thing to just remember. And you take pride in that, really. So I just want to say that despite daily reports of anti-Semitism, despite data that shows things are not getting better, the fact that we have our sovereignty, political sovereignty, military sovereignty, is miraculous.
Yes, and a sanctuary. A sanctuary for Jews. Yes, very, very important to remember. So thank you so much, Naya. Really, this has been an inspiring talk. Thank our listeners for listening. For those of you who have not yet seen Evelyn's documentary, Never Again Is Now, please do see it on Amazon or YouTube. You can learn more information about my nonfiction Holocaust play at thinedgethewedge.com. And as we end every session, we say, without putting yourself in physical harm, please speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.